This is the Crane Atlas Elite toilet, introduced around 2004 and made up until circa 2009 or so. So this is basically a Universal Rundle Atlas, a third generation model on a Crane Galaxy tank. Yup, that literally is it. This model can only be bought under Crane Plumbing, but I'm going to explain to you why this is the most pointless model yet. The overall design is very plain. Honestly, I don't think this matches pretty well together, I'll be honest, but it doesn't look outright terrible. So since the bowl is similar to the third generation Universal Rundle Atlas, it looks exactly the same. Trapway and all. The tank parts are pretty standard. You got a handle, you got a fill valve, and a flapper. Pretty standard parts, but they do function and they can be interchanged at any time, which is a nice bonus. Let's have a look at a flush. The flush is overall okay. I will say that the flushes are a tad bit worse, usually because of the tank, and especially towards the end where the siphons are a little bit more shorter, which is not a great sign. The pulling and siphon power on this toilet is a lot less good compared to its original version, and it wasn't that great to begin with. And I definitely think this has to do with the tank. It just doesn't work with this bowl. Even though it is technically 1.6 gallons, I definitely know that the flushes are a lot weaker in comparison. The performances are virtually the same compared to the original Atlas in Athens. It isn't that great, and this has to do with the trapway design, from the opening being tight and the trapway passages. Even though it is 2 inches, it really isn't the greatest. Now for bowl rinse. Overall, it isn't that great for an open rim. Sometimes some areas like this or this, usually the corners in general, are usually missed, either by factory defects or quality control issues. And that is the Crane Atlas Elite toilet, probably the most pointless model to ever exist. This is basically a downgraded version of the original third generation Atlas, and not in a good way. It definitely looks a little bit worse and also operates a little bit worse, even though it is the same bowl. So I really don't get why this toilet even exists. But let's put this toilet into the grading scale. Let's grade it. The third generation Atlas didn't look anything too special, so I ended up giving it a 5 overall. The overall design of the Atlas Elite, however, doesn't look right at all. The combination of the tank and bowl just doesn't work. It just looks off, and not in a good way. So the overall design of that toilet is getting a 4 instead. The tank parts are mostly the same and can be interchanged, but I like the tank parts of the Atlas Elite a little bit more, mostly for the simplistic fill valves and not ball cocks. The original Atlas got a 6, meanwhile the Atlas Elite is getting a 7. Since the bowls are the exact same, the quality control issues still remain on both of these toilets. For some weird reason, there seems to be some blockages in the open rim, mostly in the corners, which means that the flushes and bowl rinses are going to be slightly different per toilet, which is not a good thing. So in terms of quality control, both toilets are getting a 5. Once again, since the bowls are the exact same, the trapway is not a very good design. Not only is the opening kind of tight and small, the trapway passages are not much better either. So for both of these toilets, they're getting a 4. So you would think that both of these toilets would flush the same, right? Well, not really. The flush on the original Atlas is okay, and I ended up giving it a 6. However, for the Atlas Elite, I noticed that the flushes are slightly worse. I think this has to do with the tank size being a slight bit smaller. I noticed that these things siphon out a lot worse compared to the original Atlas. I definitely think this has to do with the tank being a little bit smaller compared to the original Atlas tank. In that case, the flushes are a little bit more inconsistent, which is not a good thing, so it's getting a 5 instead. The pulling and siphon power is very last minute on both of these toilets. On the original Atlas, it really wasn't that great and I ended up giving it a 5. But on the Atlas Elite, due to the smaller tank size, the pulling and siphon power is a little bit worse. The siphons tend to be a lot more shorter and a lot more abrupt, which is not a very good sign, reducing the score to a 4. The performances of both of these toilets are not that great. Then again, they are the exact same bowl, so that's not very shocking. Once again, the trapway passages and the opening are the biggest problems. Sure, it claims to be a 2-inch trapway,
but it definitely doesn't look like it. Overall, both of these toilets are getting a 5 in performance. Again, the ball rinses are also the exact same. It's not very good. The biggest problem is that the rim seems to be messed up, like there's some kind of blockage in it. Whether it be a quality control defect or poor design, who knows? Whatever it is, it's rather disappointing for an open rim toilet. You would expect better than this, right? Well, you're going to be let down. Both of these toilets are getting a 5 in ball rinse. The survivability of the original Atlas ended up being a 6 overall. While these are not the best quality, a lot of these are still in existence. Meanwhile, the Atlas Elite is a lot more rarer and has a slight bit more problems. So in that case, the score is now reduced to a 5. Now let's compare the overall value of both of these toilets. For the third generation Atlas, I came to the conclusion that it's a very mixed bag toilet. While it's definitely one of the better open rim toilets, which really isn't saying much, it really could have been a lot better. Everything about that toilet was very mixed. And I mean very mixed. So I ended up giving it a 5 in value. For the Atlas Elite, it's basically that, but somehow even worse. Either most of the qualities remain the same, or they're somehow slightly worse. Not to mention that the design doesn't look great either. It's basically a worse version of the third generation Universal Rundle or Crane Atlas. And I never thought that was physically possible, but they pulled it off. A more mediocre version of an already mixed bag toilet. To say that this model is pointless is an understatement, and I do not understand why this toilet even exists. In comparison, it gets a 4 in value. Now let's compare the final scores of both of these toilets. The original third generation Universal Rundle or Crane Atlas toilet ended up getting a 52 out of 100. Meanwhile, in comparison, the Crane Atlas Elite toilet ended up getting a 48 out of 100. To say that the Crane Atlas Elite toilet is pointless is an understatement. It's basically a slightly worse Atlas that brings nothing to the table. It mostly just takes away. I will never understand why this toilet even exists when it adds nothing at all.